had been far bolder than he anticipated. Who could have guessed that among these smugglers lurked such dangerous adversaries? Could you all pretend you never encountered us tonight? From within the twisting vortex came a hoarse, world-weary voice, polite enough in tone, yet anyone could sense it was magically disguised. Many Aurors were present, but only one held authority. Rufus recognized that the Gold Viper's words were directed at him, and he knew well that if he refused, this black wizard, who had faced vicious werewolves multiple times, suppressed Greyback and his pack of dozens and nearly exterminated them, would not politely continue asking for help. The underground world of Diagon Alley had always been a headache for successive ministry administrations. On one hand, the wizards operating there were mostly traditionalist lineage wizards. Hogwarts had been the main center of magical education for centuries, but these lineage wizards' histories ran even deeper, reaching back to Merlin and the era before Camelot. Wizards revered tradition. If the ministry attempted to crush underground wizards outright, support would be minimal. Moreover, a significant portion of the 28 sacred wizarding families maintained intricate ties to underground forces, creating formidable resistance. And critically, though the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had secretly collected information on active underground wizards for years and handled a few minor players, it had no effective strategy for true powerhouses. For instance, Greyback's crimes were legendary, yet the Ministry had never captured him. And now here stood the Gold Viper, a black wizard who had nearly annihilated a pack of werewolves. The Ministry will not bow to evil. Scringer's expression hardened. His sharp yellow eyes glinted with red as he raised his wand, speaking coldly. "Leave this." Kingsley tugged discreetly at Tonks's robes, speaking in a measured tone. "Go to the Ministry for reinforcements, or, as you said, fetch Dumbledore from Hogwarts. Move quickly, Tonks. We can't hold out much longer." Before Tonks could respond, the Gold Viper's hoarse voice echoed through the night. "Then I can only apologize, gentlemen. Attack!" Scringer's sudden shout set off a cascade of spellfire from the Auror's wands, like a dazzling display of fireworks lighting the night as though it were midday. Silver flashes sliced through the air, their brilliance instantly suppressing the multicolored spellfire. The sharp, ear-piercing hum shook the surrounding space violently. The battle ended almost instantaneously, truly in a blink. Thanatos stared at the fallen Aurors, blood trickling from their noses and ears as he quietly parted his lips. The Gold Viper advanced, wand-tipped trailing strands of shimmering silver mist. Suspended between reality and illusion, the vapor drifted toward the Aurors, seeping into their brains at the temples. "What are you doing, Gold Viper?" "I don't think we should kill them. It would bring us considerable." "I'm dealing with the mess your stupidity caused me." Turning back, the Gold Viper shot Thanatos a cold glare as he meticulously wove memories into the silver mist. Thanatos opened his mouth to protest, but seeing the Gold Viper's overwhelming skill, he said nothing. He shrank his neck in fear, eyes dropping to the scattered bone debris of the skeletal dragon, his face contorting with pain as he muttered curses. The remaining accomplices were quickly awakened. With Thanatos' explanations, they realized exactly who had spared them from imprisonment. "All of you will pay me 20% of the proceeds from this commission as my fee, and you, Thanatos, will hand over 50%. Golden Viper's calm words sparked outrage among his companions. They shouted in protest at his authority. Only Thanatos remained silent, not because he was particularly law-abiding, but because he had witnessed firsthand how effortlessly Golden Viper had defeated a group of Aurors. He decided it was far safer not to provoke this dangerous man any further. "Even if we refuse, there's nothing you can do, Golden Viper. You can't act against us. That would break the contract." One clever member of the furious crowd yelled, drawing attention from the others. "No one asked you to save us, Golden Viper. You're entirely overstepping." Another sneered. Golden Viper was not surprised. He hadn't foolishly expected gratitude from this group of shameless people. "I truly cannot strike you." He cast a shimmering white magical barrier, enclosing everyone inside while he stood outside it. A cold, contemptuous laugh escaped him as he spoke lightly. "But I can wake these Aurors. I think they'll be quite pleased to see you turn yourselves in." Chapter 100, Revenge, waits for no one. During the handover of the mission, a minor conflict arose. According to the contract signed by all parties, Carcass Flit, as the intermediary, was entitled to 20% of each wizard's fee as a brokerage commission. Yet everyone noticed that Golden Viper hadn't handed over a single galleon to Flit. The Black Wizards, already cheated once, were furious again. They cornered Flit under the serpentine wood notice board, demanding an explanation. Flit trembled like a lamb surrounded by wolves. Golden Viper allowed himself a satisfied smile. The mission had taken less than a month. Arduous, yes, but the rewards were extraordinary. The mission fee was 2,000 galleons plus 1,000 from Thanatos and 400 from each of the remaining 6 participants, giving Golden Viper a staggering total of over 5,000 galleons. Not bad compared to being a professor at Hogwarts, Amostar thought with pleasure. I nearly thought I'd be torn to pieces, Mr. Breen. At that moment, Flit finally explained the situation, wiping the sweat from his brow, approaching Golden Viper with a wry smile. You brought it upon yourself entirely, Carcass. Once Thanatos had left the mission market, only the 2 of them remained in the courtyard enclosed by low walls. Amostar wasted no time. You should count yourself lucky for my mercy. I didn't trouble your whole family. Flit's smile grew even more strained. Honestly, he was innocent here. Dumbledore had approached him first. Could he really refuse Albus Dumbledore's request? By the way, it had been a while since he'd been here. Golden Viper surveyed the changes in the underworld under the green glow. When his gaze fell on the pet market, surprise flickered in his eyes. The old witch who sold the trolls, she's dead? Yes. Didn't survive the month. Flit followed his gaze, looking at a large, still fresh patch of brown on the wall. He spoke casually. At first, no one noticed. By the time her body started to smell, people realized she'd been dead for days. After her death, her troll had no one to care for it. Hungry for days with nothing to eat, it went berserk. It dealt with its owner's body, but that wasn't enough. Then it treated the house elves as dessert. Tsk, tsk. Flit clicked his tongue. The scene was truly something. Half the house elves ended up inside the troll, the rest scattered in terror, fleeing. They all left, though they'll probably return eventually. There aren't many better places for them to go. Where's the giant? Taken care of. Hungry as it was, it went after another owner's cargo. See that bloodstain on the wall? That's from it. Having just completed a lucrative commission, the Gold Viper and Kakos chatted casually, moods light. Then, Kakos pulled a small notebook from his robe pocket and flipped through it. Picked up a few potentially valuable jobs recently. Nobody knows yet, Mr. Bran. You can take a look first. No need, Kakos. The Gold Viper shook his neck, fatigue in his voice. I'm going to rest for a while. I don't plan on showing up here for a bit. Kakos nodded knowingly and tucked the notebook away. He'd already heard about how Brain and his team had clashed fiercely with Rufus Scringer's Auror squad upon returning to the surface. The transport team had come out unscathed, while the Ministry Aurors were all recovering at St. Mungo's at the Ministry's expense. It was predictable that the Ministry, humiliated, would take some countermeasures in the near future, and that could affect even him. Still, Kakos wasn't worried about the Ministry coming after him. For one, the Aurors had no evidence linking him to the Commission and didn't know who had taken it. Second, powerful pureblood families backed the mission. They wouldn't just stand by unless they wanted to be entangled in it themselves. Thanks to Dumbledore's absurd maneuvering, Kakos had formed a small bond with Bran. They exchanged brief farewells before Kakos went about his own business, while the Gold Viper stayed behind in the underground world, strolling toward the bustling market built beneath the cavern walls, lined with rickety stalls. Since he'd earned some money, he intended to spend it well. After some haggling, he bought a few ancient, worm-eaten magical notebooks from a Greek wizard. Their covers were worn, the text written in archaic runes. The vendor claimed they had been excavated from a temple and, upon verification, appeared to be the legendary Halebo's research manuscripts. The Gold Viper studied the damaged pages with a cold smirk. In this modest underground market, every stall boasted a few legendary wizard relics, often of dubious authenticity, as pride pieces. A casual stroll could yield a few of Merlin's wands or whiskers, all used to trap unsuspecting newcomers or wandering foreign wizards. Given rumors linking the cavern to Merlin himself, even fake artifacts counted as local specialties. Later, the Gold Viper moved toward the far end of the market, where herbs and potion ingredients were sold. Stockpiling materials for magical restorative potions had become habitual. He'd harvest periodically. The vendors recognized him immediately as a high-spending customer. Without waiting for him to ask, they crowded forward, eagerly pushing bottles and jars of ingredients. In a less conspicuous corner of the herb market, a small stall displayed modest quality goods. The pale, poorly nourished wizard behind it eyed the Gold Viper's overflowing purse with envy. But as his gaze passed over the Gold Viper's collar, his body shuddered violently. Behind his mask, his expression twisted with fear. He abandoned his wares and bolted toward the steps, racing for the fireplace above. The unusual behavior immediately raised the Gold Viper's alertness. He glanced at the fleeing figure, and sensing the raw magical power within him, his eyes snapped wide. A terrifying aura surged from his perfectly proportioned body, instantly overwhelming the surrounding vendors. Crack! Several steel-tinted spears shot down as if from the heavens. With metallic clangs, the fleeing wizard was trapped inside a metal cage, reminiscent of the chamber serpent. Run again if you dare! The Gold Viper, brushing past bewildered onlookers, strode up to the cage. He looked at the defeated, pitiful wizard inside, and a predatory grin spread across his face. 5 days online, total subscriptions, 23,333. Back at the old family home in the countryside, all 3 air conditioners were running at once, the fuse blew, and I had to type in the dark on my laptop. Chapter 101, Not Dead Yet. Subscribe and follow. Internationally renowned figure and best-selling author, recipient of the Merlin Order Third Class Medal, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, former Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Gilderoy Lockhart. Previously detained by the Ministry of Magic due to an anonymous tip, today at 9 o'clock, the Wizengamot Tribunal concluded its trial. According to ministry sources, Lockhart faces up to 15 years in prison for multiple charges. The front page of the emergency edition of the Daily Prophet ran a lengthy article with a photo of Lockhart beneath it. Compared to earlier public photos, this one made Lockhart look far more pathetic. His hair was messy, bound by magical chains. His oversized prison robe hung loosely over his frame. Teeth yellowed, beard scraggly, and his blue eyes radiated confusion, as if he couldn't understand why he'd suddenly fallen to such a fate. This would likely be Gilderoy Lockhart's last headline. Amosta's eyes sparkled with amusement as he tossed the newspaper aside and glanced at Remus Lupin across from him, who, once poised and refined, was now practically wolfing down a white weasel sandwich. The round coffee table was littered with empty plates. Noticing Amosta's gaze, Lupin swallowed hard and offered an apologetic smile. I imagine I must look rather disheveled right now. Amosta couldn't help but raise a brow. He studied the patched-up wizard robe Lupin wore, a swirl of emotions stirring within him. You're skilled enough, Lupin. I don't understand how you ended up like this. Lupin seemed about to speak, but then noticed the bar's owner, Tom, approaching with 2 glasses of sherry. He quickly shut his mouth. Once Tom set the dark, thick, sweet drinks on the table and walked away, Lupin rubbed the gray strands in his hair, lowering his voice to a bitter laugh. You know who I am, Mr. Breen. Out there, no one wants to hire a dangerous werewolf, especially one who's unavailable for part of every month. The underground job market has tasks that aren't particularly difficult. With your skills, completing them is easy enough. Amosta leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, tilting his head as he asked. Lupin's face visibly darkened. He didn't answer immediately, staring at the half-eaten sandwich on his plate. The silence stretched so long that even Amosta grew impatient. Finally, Lupin spoke, his tone heavy with bitterness. True, but I don't dare, Mr. Breen. It's hard to explain. I feel I should keep a distance from illegal things, unless, of course, I ever want to become the same kind of person as Greyback. Sadness. Amosta couldn't help the thought rising in his mind. A werewolf who'd rather live in poverty than harm others. Kind. Principled. Yet the wizarding world would never reconsider its prejudice against werewolves, never feel much sympathy, and certainly wouldn't think about the injustices they endured. They only knew to reject all outsiders. Amosta wasn't particularly fond of werewolves because of Greyback and his followers, but he wasn't the type to actively discriminate. Still, he had no patience to pity these poor creatures for all the injustices that had forced them to their current despised state. Suppressing that small spark of pity, Amasta cleared his throat, coldly smirking. Then, Mr. Lupin, I suppose we should address where our personal grievances began. Yes, Mr. Breen, I'm not surprised by your reaction when you saw me today. Lupin's bitter smile deepened, nodding apologetically. Albus wrote me a letter reminding me what your reaction might be after you left Hogwarts. Humph, Amasta's gaze was as sharp as the cold snort he let out. He stared directly into Lupin's eyes. I spared your life, Lupin, he said, his voice low, tinged with bloodlust. Lupin shifted uncomfortably, about to defend himself, but the young man didn't give him the chance. And how did you repay my mercy? Asking Dumbledore about me? You must know the potential consequences of such actions. Had Dumbledore decided to wipe me out, only two fates awaited me: a lifetime in Azkaban or exile from the European wizarding world, wandering the earth. So tell me, do werewolves express gratitude differently than ordinary wizards, that I can't understand why you would repay kindness with such betrayal? Lupin had no words. After that fierce battle years ago, he had been genuinely frightened by the young wizard who had appeared in the underground world. Instinctively, he wanted to confirm Golden Viper's true identity, writing directly to Albus without considering the consequences it might have for Amasta. Excuses and apologies were useless in front of a wizard like the Gold Viper. If you wanted to solve a problem with him, you had to offer something that could truly sway him, some form of benefit. I have some information, Mr. Bran, which might be of value to you. After a long silence, Lupin lifted his head. Though barely in his early 30s, the strain of living under constant threat and the scars in his heart had aged him. He looked closer to 50. Fenrir Greyback has resumed his activities recently. He's been quietly trying to learn your true identity, probably hoping to find your family. On top of that, he's been reaching out to some of his former partners. You know whom I mean. I believe he's planning a decisive battle with you to settle old scores. He's still alive? A derisive snort escaped Amasta, followed by a hint of surprise. Werewolves do have remarkable vitality. Unfortunately, Mr. Brain, he is indeed still alive. Lupin drew a deep breath. After the last encounter with you, half of his body was practically burnt beyond recognition. Normally, even for a werewolf, such severe magical damage would be fatal. But he was lucky. At the brink of death, he remembered a reward he once received for a particularly successful massacre while working under that nameless Dark Lord, a powerful healing spell. It barely held his shattered body together, and after some recovery time, he regained vitality. Still somewhat valuable, Amasta nodded, then added coldly. But compared to the torment I've endured, Lupin, if Greyback dares to bother me again, I'll make sure not even a trace of his bones remains. You don't expect this news to soothe my anger, do you? Lupin's expression was one of helplessness. He shook his robe to make its patched sections more visible. You know my situation, Mr. Bran. If you hope I'll atone with galleons, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Amasta sipped his sweet wine thoughtfully, pondering the issue. Kill Lupin to vent his anger? Of course not. Amasta had always approached killing with utmost caution. Their grievances were nowhere near the level that required drawing wands to take a life. Besides, Lupin clearly had a special connection with Dumbledore. Amasta fell silent, and Lupin waited quietly for his judgment. Neither spoke, and when Tom, the bartender, came over to ask if they wanted anything else, Lupin hesitated. Amasta waved generously, letting him handle the order himself. Lupin resumed his meal. Amasta, mind-wandering, flipped past a portrait of Lockhart and idly scanned the Daily Prophet. On the 7th page, a small job posting caught his eye. A faint smile of deep intent spread across his handsome features. Chapter 102, Gentle Hearts. What are you joking about, Mr. Bran? Lupin's mouth fell open, a mix of shock, confusion, and disbelief on his weathered, haggard face. He thought Amasta must be playing a cruel joke, but looking at his solemn, earnest expression, it seemed unlikely. You want me to apply for the Defense Against the Dark Arts professorship at Hogwarts? Even the well-traveled, war-seasoned Lupin could hardly accept such an absurd suggestion. His eyebrows shot up, voice quick. Mr. Brain, I trust you haven't forgotten that I am a... He stopped mid-sentence as patrons moved around the bar, alert. Isn't it an excellent proposal? Amasta smiled. Being a professor is a respectable and meaningful job. It has nothing to do with crime, offers a generous salary, and could lift you out of your hardships. You know, Dumbledore isn't bound by mundane rules or opinions. Lupin, your skills are solid. I believe you can handle this role. As the crowd thinned, Lupin continued voicing his confusion. I studied at that school. I know what the position entails. But that's not the problem, Mr. Bran. Undeniably, the offer was tempting, yet reason told him it was impossible. My werewolf identity isn't exactly a secret. Do you really think Hogwarts board or the ministry would allow Dumbledore to hire a werewolf to teach young witches and wizards to defend against dark magic? It's ridiculous. I am a dangerous magical creature. If you can't accept yourself, Lupin, how can you expect others to see you with reason? Amasta continued to guide him gently. Dumbledore will handle any concerns you have. Moreover, the school has a potions master who can brew wolfsbane, sparing you from the monthly pain. The wolfsbane potion was almost a savior for werewolves like Lupin, forced by fate to endure the curse. Unfortunately, its exorbitant price put it out of reach for most. Countless agonizing transformation nights had Lupin praying he could scrape together enough galleons to afford this precious potion. Mentioning this, Lupin hesitated noticeably. Yet, thinking of his past quarrels with the potions master, he could only shake his head bitterly. It's not that simple, Mr. Breen, Lupin said with a forlorn smile. If you had children, would you want their teacher to be a werewolf who loses control and bites people's necks at a moment's notice? Amidst this, Amasta, having just thought of a perfect opportunity for revenge, refused to give up easily. With patience, he gently coaxed Lupin, lavishly explaining the benefits of becoming a respected professor. Think about it, Remus, Amasta addressed him warmly by name. If you excel in such a position, imagine the wonderful changes that could follow. People might finally revise their perception of werewolves, no longer seeing you as outsiders. Remus, you could be the one to save all the werewolves forced to carry their burdens in the shadows. Amasta spoke with such fervor that even he had to admire his own persuasive skills. Could it be that I really have the potential to become the third Dark Lord? Watching Lupin just a step away from agreeing, like Amasta's mind flashed with this thought. Lupin exhaled heavily. A Gryffindor at heart, he felt courage steadily gathering within him under Amasta's guidance. But there are rumors. Suddenly recalling something, Lupin's eyes fell on the newspaper spread on the table, frowning. About the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts. Some bad stories. This year's Gilderoy Lockhart seems to confirm them. Nonsense, Amasta exclaimed with mock severity. That's just hearsay. Look at me, Lupin. I stepped down from that post safely, unharmed. In fact, things have gone rather well since, even brought me a bit of fortune recently. By every measure, Amasta's suggestion was sound, yet it naturally left Lupin wary. Why, Mr. Breen? Lupin asked, puzzled. Undoubtedly, I offended you. Had you treated me as you did those violent underlings of yours, I wouldn't have been surprised. Yet you didn't. You went out of your way to introduce me to work, to help me make a living. Strange, isn't it? Because I recognize your skill and kindness, Remus. Amasta smiled gently, already sensing his goal was near. I've taught this course before. I spent months closely interacting with Hogwarts students. They're truly wonderful children. They deserve proper professional education and a bright future. And Lockhart's case shows even great minds like Dumbledore's can make mistakes. I cannot bear to see these kids waste their precious years. Remus, I believe you have the ability to help them. The brightest noon sunlight cut through the gloom of the bar, dissipating the fog in Lupin's mind as well. His doubts lifted, replaced with a sense of relief. I should check on my herbs back home, Mr. Breen. Lupin stood, adjusting his worn robe slightly. Hope no one fed them to the centaurs. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Breen. This meal will keep me going for several days. About my proposal. Watching Lupin head toward Diagon Alley, Amasta narrowed his eyes and rose. I understand you can't give me an answer right now. Take your time to consider it. Having endured a brutal war and long years in the underground world, Lupin was far more rational and cautious than Amasta had imagined. Also, Lupin said, standing in the golden sunlight, his relaxed smile making him look 20 years younger. He regarded the young wizard at the table with a knowing glint in his eyes. I think I understand why Albus could be so forgiving after learning what you've done these past years. You really are different from the image I had of you. What do you mean? Amasta's expression hardened instantly. Lupin smiled and waved to him, then turned and walked into the light. A moment later, a gentle voice drifted through the doorway to Amasta's ears, leaving him in a long, contemplative silence. You have a kind heart, Amasta. Chapter 103, Epilogue. After Lupin left, Amasta didn't immediately follow him out of the leaky cauldron. Days of continuous missions had left him mentally drained. He asked the bartender, Tom, for a room to rest, planning to recharge here for the night before returning to the Muggle world the next day. The early July sun in London shone brilliantly, with a hint of laziness in the air. Amasta spent the entire afternoon in his room, only emerging once the sun had dipped below the horizon and the full moon hung high among the branches. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, he slowly sat up in bed. Once the mind relaxed, the body followed suit. Amasta massaged his protesting stomach, got dressed, and wobbled out of the room. Because Hogwarts was on summer break, the pub was noticeably busier with wizards, though most were simply passing through between the wizarding and Muggle worlds. Few actually lingered. Amasta noticed a few young students from the school, but he'd chosen a seat behind a column, a secluded spot. The children, excited by their summer vacation, didn't notice him, and Amasta welcomed the quiet, preferring not to draw attention to himself. Chewing slowly on a steak and sipping the rich red wine, he savored the rare, tranquil moments that belonged solely to him. News of the Ministry's Auror Chief, or Chief Rufus Scrimger, leading a team to hunt smugglers, only for them to be utterly defeated by a single dark wizard and sent to St. Mungo's, had not made it into the Daily Prophet. Conversation around him still revolved around Gilderoy Lockhart, who had left the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor in a thoroughly undignified manner. Wherever you go, the saying, when the wall falls, everyone pushes, holds true. Lockhart's past crimes, once reported, transformed him from a widely adored author into a figure of ridicule overnight. His fans vanished as quickly as his reputation. The wizards discussing the topic sneered, claiming they'd always seen through him, as if admitting otherwise would be laughable. 15 years? Wizengamot didn't go easy this time, Amasta murmured, shaking his head in bemused wonder. He didn't know how Lockhart's story ended in the original timeline, but it surely couldn't have been worse than this. Just as he was praying for Lockhart's life in prison, a familiar voice reached his ears, making his brow furrow. Sit over there. Draco, didn't you notice your mother carrying something? Haven't I taught you better? Amasta's lips twitched, and a strange smile crept across his face. At home, Draco, usually haughty and spoiled at school, might not have been perfectly obedient, but he never dared defy his father. Half snatching the object from his mother, Narcissa, he rolled his eyes toward Lucius and mumbled as he walked toward Amasta. Gryffindor lost to Hufflepuff. Hufflepuff won. Then Ravenclaw also lost to Hufflepuff. You defeated Hufflepuff, but in the final match, you lost to Gryffindor, yet your total score was higher than Gryffindor's. So you won the championship? Amasta raised an eyebrow, looking at Draco, who was both excited and slightly tense from encountering him. He blinked and smiled. Wood didn't kill Potter? I suspect he wanted to kill the entire Gryffindor team. Draco grinned widely. His father's ousting from the Hogwarts board had left him sulking for a time, but the Quidditch victory restored every shred of his lost pride. Thinking of the final match, with Gryffindor and Slytherin's scores frozen at 170 to 130, and Madame Hooch declaring Slytherin the winner on total points, Draco couldn't help but smile at how petrified the Gryffindor team looked on their broomsticks. As Draco endlessly recounted the final game's details to the smiling Amasta, Lucius remained eerily silent. He neither looked at his son nor studied Amasta. His pale gray eyes followed the comings and goings in the pub, radiating a cold, forbidding aura. Draco. Keeping her silence, Narcissa Malfoy suddenly interrupted her son's boasting. She cast a calm glance at her husband, then rose and spoke to Draco in a tone far more solemn than usual. I just remembered. The dresses I ordered from the Truffaut boutique are ready. I need you to accompany me. It's just a few dresses, Mother. There's really no need. How dare you defy your mother's orders, Draco? Lucius snapped out of his wooden stupor, glaring at Malfoy with authority. Watching Draco reluctantly trail after his mother out of the leaky cauldron, Amasta withdrew his gaze, flicked his wand, and muttered, "Muffle." Then he smiled at Lucius Malfoy. "Your wife is very beautiful, Lucius, and remarkably clever as well." Lucius said nothing, studying the young wizard before him with an inscrutable intensity, his breathing subtly quickening. "I hear that ever since you lost your seat on the Hogwarts board, troubles have been a constant companion. The father of the Weasley children, Arthur Weasley, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, seems to have visited your estate more than once to avenge his youngest daughter, and has uncovered quite a few interesting trinkets." Thinking of that despicable pureblood, Lucius's gray eyes practically sparked with anger. Amasta was right. Arthur Weasley had caused so many headaches recently that Lucius had almost become the laughingstock among pureblood families. Worse, though low-ranking, Arthur had deep connections in the ministry. Attempts to pressure him through senior officials had yielded little effect. "Wasn't that also thanks to your brother?" Shoving the thought of that foolish, muggle-loving, self-indulgent upstart from his mind, Lucius drew a deep breath and looked at Amasta. A faintly cold smile touched his lips, but his gray eyes betrayed no warmth. "One thing has puzzled me for a long time, Mr. Breen. You broke into the Slytherin secret chamber, subdued that beast, and saved several students. For your efforts, Fudge even went through special procedures to award you a largely symbolic medal. Yet why did the Daily Prophet report nothing of this, as if all the credit belonged to Harry Potter and his reckless friends?" "What do you think the reason might be, Mr. Malfoy?" Amasta sipped from his wine glass, a faint smile playing on his lips. Chapter 104. You're as good as dead. As the head of the Malfoy family, one of the 28 sacred pureblood lineages, wealthy and cunning beyond compare, Lucius Malfoy was naturally a wizard, accustomed to the wider world. He had interacted with high-ranking ministry officials across Britain and Europe, renowned scholars, masterful potions experts, greedy and cunning goblins, and many top-tier wizards in their respective fields. Yet, frankly, the young wizard before him left Lucius at a loss for words. He felt something akin to standing before Dumbledore, yet also reminiscent of his own youthful encounters with something indefinable. "I suppose," Lucius chuckled inwardly at his own unease. Adjusting his breathing, he tried to relax his expression and rely on his negotiation experience to gain the upper hand in this conversation. "Could it be that Dumbledore feared you might outshine his prized protege, so he made a special call to the minister?" "Your skills in sowing discord are quite disappointing, Mr. Malfoy." Amasta's smile remained unchanged, though his purple eyes glimmered with amusement. "If you're truly curious, Mr. Malfoy, I'm not unwilling to explain. In fact, it was at my request that Dumbledore... And as for the reason..." Lucius instinctively held his breath. He stared unflinchingly into Amasta's eyes, hoping to exert psychological pressure. Yet the words that followed shattered all his calculations and carefully maintained composure. "Of course, it's so that one day in the future that dark wizard whose name must not be spoken might reemerge into the world's view. And when he learns what happened at Hogwarts last school year, he won't turn his wrath on me. Honestly, Mr. Malfoy, do you really think that thing you secretly slipped into Ginny Weasley's bag is just an ordinary diary? Or some trinket you think the Dark Lord made in Professor Binns's History of Magic class because he was bored at Hogwarts?" "What do you mean?" From the fine beads of sweat forming on his otherwise unremarkable forehead, it was clear that describing Lucius Malfoy as utterly horrified would be no exaggeration. His face was ghostly pale, his lips cracked like parched earth, and the composure he tried to maintain flickered instantly into unrest and terror. "The Dark Lord is finished, isn't he? Harry Potter dismantled his power. That's a truth everyone knows. If you're so keen on deceiving yourself, then by all means continue, Mr. Malfoy. After all, it won't be me suffering the consequences." Lucius's breath came in ragged gusts, gray eyes bloodshot, fixed on Amasta leisurely sipping his wine. Fear even made the legs he hid beneath the table tremble. The Dark Lord could return? Among Voldemort's former followers, the Death Eaters, some still longed for their fallen master, but Lucius Malfoy was not one of them. He hadn't forgotten the lengths he went to after Voldemort's downfall, the promises he made to avoid sharing a cell with Dementors in Azkaban. If the Dark Lord ever returned, the Malfoy family would face nothing but ruin. Lucius knew the terror Voldemort inspired. He had never truly imagined his return, and over time he had come to believe it nearly impossible. Otherwise, he would never have risked slipping that precious item, entrusted to him with solemn warnings by Voldemort, into that little girl's bag, merely to amuse himself with her father's reaction. Only that old fool Dumbledore thinks he'll come back. He wants to frighten people, so he can continue to command respect. Lucius's hoarse, strained voice barely held his reason as he said this. Perhaps, Amasta shrugged indifferently. At least I think Dumbledore's concern isn't without reason, Mr. Malfoy. Surely you know more about the Dark Lord's power than I do, don't you? Amasta's words struck Lucius at his core. He clenched his teeth, his expression as if struck by lightning. Only after a long while did his heart, frozen with fear, begin to beat steadily again. Dumbledore told you, you know what that diary is, don't you? Tell me. I'm telling you this today, not to save your pathetic life, Mr. Malfoy, Amasta said, lowering his gaze, eyes dark and serious. I don't care what becomes of you, but if possible, I hope to save Draco's innocent soul. If one day the Dark Lord walks among us again, I want you to be prepared, to ensure Draco and his mother survive. As for you, Lucius Malfoy, you can wait to die. Lucius Malfoy was a shrewd businessman, devoted his life to two things, family honor and wealth. But before Narcissa and Draco, all of that meant nothing. Tell me, Brain, what exactly is that thing, if you truly pity Draco? Lucius's low growl was partially drowned by the effect of Amasta's spell, yet his peculiar state drew attention. Tom, the bartender, recognized the famous Mr. Malfoy and hesitated briefly about to approach, but the deep, intent gaze Amasta casually cast froze him in place. I know through whose channels you entered Hogwarts, Brain. If Lucius were thinking clearly, as usual, he would know that speaking now would neither help him understand nor solve anything, and could easily provoke Amostar Brain. But the safety of Narcissa and Draco clouded his judgment, making his words reckless. I know Fudge Brain. He could never have imagined issuing a decree only to award a valuable second-class Merlin medal to a criminal in the underground world, right? I can figure out your position there, Brain. You surely don't want your reputation ruined, do you? Oh, how amusing. You're trying to dig up my dirt? Amasta set down his wine, a cold smile curling his lips. Malfoy, even if I never pried, your despicable deeds reached me one by one. I heard that after Arthur Weasley emptied the things you hid at home, you spent a fortune to avoid punishment. And then, to fill that empty collection room of yours, you spent even more galleons acquiring a fresh batch of contraband from Carcass? Amasta slowly stood, towering over him. His gaze was so icy it could freeze the Black Lake. Who do you think I am, Malfoy? Kind old Dumbledore. Do you think it's the cold, hard galleons that give you the courage to speak so boldly in front of me? Chapter 105, Despair. Malfoy struggled to suppress the rising panic, attempting to force a mocking smile to convey his derision at Amasta's apparent disdain for wealth and power. But suddenly, he realized he couldn't move, not just his lips, but every part of his body. At some point, the once noisy bar had fallen completely silent. The lingering aromas of food, rich liquor, and the mingled scents of patrons had vanished as if erased. It was as though an invisible eraser had swept through reality itself. The once dimly colored black and gray tavern lost all substance, leaving only outlines, and the world collapsed rapidly from 3 dimensions into 2. Even those remaining frameworks soon dissolved under the influence of a mysterious force. What unfolded before Lucius Malfoy's eyes surpassed all his understanding of magic. He stared in disbelief at the vanishing surroundings, his thoughts seemingly frozen along with the world. He was now in a void of pure white, infinite and directionless, like a colorless universe. Lucius blinked and gradually regained control over his body, but he still could not move. From beneath him, the stone chair on which he sat had sprouted countless cold chains, binding his limbs and neck as if he were on trial. Directly ahead, or perhaps at some immeasurable distance, 2 purple suns suddenly appeared. Silhouettes began to emerge from the white, and within seconds, Amasta materialized in this void. He looked down at the trembling Lucius Malfoy, his gaze indifferent and predatory, like a fire dragon staring at a scolding goblin. Under that lethal stare, sweat poured down Lucius's face. Regaining his composure, he immediately understood the magnitude of his mistake. Since Voldemort's fall, the wizarding world of Britain had known peace. Ordinary wizards no longer faced duels to the death in their daily lives. In times of peace, money and power were the ultimate deterrents. Surrounded by the elite at glittering social gatherings, envied by half-blood and muggle-born wizards struggling to make a living, the long-lost Lucius Malfoy finally understood a lesson he had once learned while serving the Dark Lord, but had deliberately forgotten over time. Peel away the veneer of power, and at its core lies violence, or, more plainly, raw strength. The young man before him, who had effortlessly dealt with the Dark Lord's remaining artifacts and the millennia-old basilisk in the Slytherin chamber, possessed far more power and influence than Lucius could ever hope to wield. Spare me. Malfoy had never been a man of iron will. In the briefest instant, he managed to summon a fragment of the skills honed under Voldemort's command. He sobbed, staring only at Amosta's feet, and imitated Dobby's posture of humility, whispering with utmost desperation, "Spare my life, please, Mr. Breen, for Draco's sake!" Tap, tap, tap. The sound of approaching footsteps made Lucius shiver even more. He wanted to lift his gaze to gauge Amosta's expression to see if he might survive, but dared not. He feared Amosta shared the Dark Lord's habits. Voldemort had never allowed his servants to look him directly in the face. Especially after countless cruel experiments on human subjects, his visage had become increasingly inhuman, and he repeatedly warned the Death Eaters against breaking this taboo. Soon, though, Lucius no longer worried about whether he might survive. Amosta had already provided the answer with his actions. Clang! The sharp sound of a spear piercing his body, and then the stone chair rang out. Blood flowed freely from his abdomen, spreading across his robes like crimson spider lilies in full bloom, vivid, yet saturated with the scent of death. Wave after wave of excruciating pain crashed through his consciousness, making his body shake like a sieve. Still, he did not dare raise his head. Spare Narcissa and Draco, Mr. Breen. I'll give anything. Tears streamed down Lucius's face as he pleaded his final, most humble and sincere request. But the only response he received was a derisive snort. Consider this a lesson, Malfoy. Let it never happen again. The cold, unyielding voice reached Lucius Malfoy's ears as his consciousness began to fade, leaving him engulfed in endless confusion, even as the flame of life dwindled like a candle in the wind. From the tone of Amostar Brain's words, it seemed he had truly decided to spare Lucius's life for Draco's sake, but hadn't Brain already acted? The bronze spear piercing his abdomen brought pain so real it made him stagger, the sensation of life slowly leaking from his body, leaving him utterly powerless. Perhaps Amostar Brain meant he wouldn't unleash his wrath on Narcissa and Draco. Lucius Malfoy thought this as darkness gradually consumed his awareness. My dear, are you all right?" A sudden, dim golden light tore through the endless darkness. Like awakening from a deep sleep, Lucius Malfoy found himself dazed, seated behind a column, calling anxiously for his wife, while his gaze anxiously scanned for his son. After a long moment, color finally returned to his ghostly pale face. Lucius stiffly turned his head and noticed, besides Narcissa and Draco, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered around him. "Mr. Malfoy, you're not seriously hurt, are you?" The bartender Tom squeezed to the front, eyes wide as he examined Lucius's face, pale and looking as if he had barely survived a severe illness. His voice trembled. If the head of the infamous Malfoy family, Lucius Malfoy, had been harmed in his bar, Tom could only imagine the disastrous consequences that would follow. And that man? When he finally spoke, Lucius was startled to realize how parched his throat felt, as if he hadn't had water for days. His voice came out hoarse and dry. "If you mean the young gentleman opposite you," Tom replied respectfully. "He left some time ago, Mr. Malfoy. Ever since he left, you've just stood here. Cough. I thought you were pondering something important, so I didn't dare disturb you." "What happened to you, my dear?" Narcissa furrowed her brows, staring at her husband with concern. Draco's expression subtly shifted. He understood his father well enough to know that when Lucius spoke to certain less notable people, he had a habit of being sarcastic. If his father used that tone with Professor Brain is an incredibly powerful wizard, father. Draco's voice carried nervous urgency, and his personality can be very forceful, especially when dealing with someone's offense. Offense? Narcissa glared at Draco in disapproval. What are you saying, Draco? Draco. Lucius, still in a state of stunned silence, suddenly interrupted his son's explanation, fixing his gaze on Draco's puzzled eyes. This Professor Brain, if you ever encounter him again, show him a little more respect. Professor Brain has already left Hogwarts, Father. He's very mysterious. I doubt I'll have many chances to meet him again. Not fully understanding why his father was giving such advice, Draco hesitated, then said regretfully, No, he will return to Hogwarts. Lucius cried. Gaze swept past the crowd, piercing the deep night outside the door. After a long silence, he exhaled heavily and said with unwavering certainty, He will return there, without a doubt. Chapter 106, Homecoming. The last time he had returned, it had been the bitter cold of deep winter, snow sealing every doorway. Now the maple trees lining the streets had shed their late crimson hues, bursting anew with vibrant life. At the city's edge, the narrow streets, lined with abandoned railway tracks, remained largely unchanged from his previous visit. Compared to the ever-evolving Muggle city, this part of the wizarding world seemed carved by time itself, bearing indelible marks. Even in an age where everything could change in an instant, the weathered traces of the past stubbornly held their ground. The only exception was a strikingly out-of-place six-story building with sky-blue walls, rising among rows of century-old gray structures. Behind its freshly painted iron gates lay a courtyard equally transformed, where once there had been mere dirt, now smooth stone tiles stretched underfoot. In the flower beds at the corners, vibrant Tudor roses and clover swayed gently in the morning sun, the golden pink light scattering across dewdrops on their petals. A serene warmth seemed to sweep through Amosta's soul, bringing a genuine smile to his face. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers, a completely Muggle outfit, Amosta stood quietly in the courtyard. Behind him sat a large, somewhat exaggerated suitcase, packed with gifts he had promised Mrs. Reagan for the children. Truth be told, carrying such a massive suitcase was cumbersome, but what choice did he have? He couldn't very well pull a folding bicycle out of a handbag. The clatter of breakfast in the dormitory had begun to fade, and Amosta knew that soon a crowd of children, their ill-fitting uniforms patched and worn, would pour out to start their day. Delivering milk, newspapers, or washing dishes at the breakfast hall, this had been the rhythm of childhood for orphans like them. Amosta himself had done similar work when he had first arrived here. Of course, he had quickly grown tired of such monotonous, low-paying chores, turning instead to more skillful ventures. He had helped children from a grammar school in the old city center with homework, used his abilities to escort bullied kids safely to and from school, or traded small trinkets that intrigued them. The last option was the most profitable, but Amosta had abandoned it after a short while. Though there were no city inspectors like in Muggle towns, police and government officials still maintained public order, making street trading risky. Time, however, is a magical vessel. It can turn unpleasant memories into something almost sweet, like a fine wine, letting the bitterness fade into warmth. Experience matters more, KG. Even if there are more houses on East Street, I can guarantee I'll finish the task faster than you. A crisp, spirited voice rang from the doorway, pulling Amosta from his memories. He raised an eyebrow, a broad smile spreading across his face, brighter than the golden sunlight. As he saw the tall, handsome young man standing in the courtyard, the children filtering through the doorway froze, their chatter silenced. Even the little ones at the front, pressed against the hall, made no sound. Brother Amosta? A small boy with brown hair at the forefront rubbed his eyes, whispering in disbelief. Good morning, little ones. Amosta grinned and opened his arms wide. Summer's weather, fickle as a teenage girl's mood, changed in an instant. Though the morning sky had been clear, a sudden heavy rain began to fall. The decades-old drainage system couldn't keep up, and soon ankle-deep puddles formed on the stone streets. Yet the poor weather did nothing to dampen the children's spirits. They hurried across the water in their satchels, smiling, rushing from every direction toward the six-story building. Inside the modest hall, Amosta found himself surrounded by dozens of children, some as young as 4 or 5, others nearly the age of Harry and his friends. Their eyes sparkled as they listened intently to Amosta recount tales of the outside world. And not just Europe, Dean. The reason I've been away so long is because I also visited other continents. Egypt. I'm sure you've all heard of it. There are pyramids and endless deserts. Brother Amasta, when I went to deliver milk to Mrs. Kareen, I glimpsed some scenes on her television. A rosy-cheeked boy shouted excitedly from the crowd. It's beautiful there. Can we have a TV too, Brother Amasta? A little girl in Amasta's arms asked eagerly, her voice still tinged with babyish tones. That's no problem, Lena, Amasta said, kissing her forehead with a smile. I'll talk to Mrs. Reagan. Soon, every dorm room here will have a color television. We might even set up a room with computers so you can take turns playing games when you have free time. The children erupted in cheers, their voices almost drowning out the patter of rain, rattling the hall's windows and doors. Some of the more curious ones asked why Amasta, a sales rep for a drilling company, would need machines in a desert-filled place like Egypt. Ah, well, there are cities on land too, Eliza. Anywhere with land will need drills, Amasta stammered, waving it off with a nervous smile. Brother Amasta! Little Hammer, finally finding a chance to speak, waved his hand eagerly. Can you stay home longer this time? Of course, Little Hammer, Amasta said, ruffling the boy's hair and smiling. I'll stay longer, little ones. Actually, besides seeing you, I'm here to help with your studies. The officials at the public school can't keep fobbing us off with excuses about lacking classrooms or teachers. The children exchanged glances and then laughed oddly, a mix of relief and amusement. That problem's already solved, Brother Amasta. Little Hammer beamed, proud of the news. Sister Vedia already spoke with the school. By September, many of us will be able to attend public school. Sister Vedia? Amasta's mouth fell open in surprise. Who's that? A new staff member. Chapter 107. Your name night fell, and the starlight that had traveled across light years, cleansed by rain, regained a dazzling purity. The stars reflected in the small puddles that had collected on the cobblestone streets and courtyards, turning the wet ground into a mysterious mirror of the night sky. Inside the 6-story orphanage, the second-floor dining room had been transformed into a banquet hall. At this moment, a dinner was underway. In terms of scale, this banquet could hardly compare to the grandeur of a Hogwarts opening feast or a Halloween celebration, yet in terms of liveliness, it rivaled them all. As the evening progressed, Amasta, once the center of attention, gradually drifted to the sidelines. Children, who normally couldn't dream of such a lavish spread even at Christmas, moved briskly between tables piled with fragrant grilled steaks, roasted sausages, potato pies, creamy puddings, and a variety of fruit juices. Their faces glowed with joy, brighter than tulips in full bloom. Amasta leaned against the wooden railing of the staircase, watching the scene with a gentle expression. His gaze wandered, and when it settled on a graceful figure smiling softly while dining with the children, his eyelids twitched, almost imperceptibly, a subtle flash of color in his eyes. She was a woman of warm, serene beauty. Her modest, knee-length, cream-colored dress complemented her long, emerald hair that cascaded smoothly over her shoulders. Her fair skin emitted a subtle glow under the dim lighting, and even from several dozen feet away, Amasta could faintly sense the fresh, clean aura surrounding her. Soft-haired, graceful, and poised, this was Amasta's impression of her. Truly, despite traveling between worlds and encountering countless people, he had never seen a woman with such elegance. Ms. Vicia Hill, volunteering at the orphanage, seemed to notice Amasta's gaze. She looked back at him from across the room and nodded, a faint smile on her lips. Amasta returned the smile, then, taking advantage of the distraction, turned and ascended the stairs. Upstairs, the lively sounds from the second floor still drifted along the hallway. Amasta walked expressionless through the dim corridor, his eyes scanning the walls, occasionally tapping on them to test the building's integrity. Before he realized it, he had reached the top floor. Climbing a steel ladder beside the laundry room, he reached the roof and walked to the railing. The view from the roof was limited. Neighboring low-rise buildings blocked most of the surrounding scenery. But the distance from the bustle and the dim lighting left the stars clear and bright. Amasta rested his arms on the railing, tilting his head back to gaze quietly at the night sky. After a while, a cool night breeze brushed his face. He squinted and pulled a cigarette from his pocket. Smoking had been a habit in his previous life, and back then he had been quite addicted. But since arriving in this world, reliving infancy and childhood, he had successfully quit and had no intention of picking it up again. Still, when his mood darkened, he would sometimes take out a cigarette just to inhale the scent of the tobacco. Suddenly, crisp footsteps echoed along the steel ladder behind him. Amasta crushed the cigarette in his hand and tossed it to the wind, then turned. Seeing Vidya's coat draped over her arm, his deep, inscrutable gaze flickered. Mrs. Regan told me that every time you return here, you like to spend a long time alone on the rooftop. Vidya approached gracefully and handed him the coat. It seems you are a person who enjoys quiet, Mr. Brain. Thank you, Amasta replied, taking the coat but not putting it on. He appraised Vidya, still looking tall and elegant in low-heeled sandals, and smiled casually. No need for formalities, Miss Hill. Just call me Amasta. Though she tried to conceal it, a trace of other emotions lingered in Vidya's clear eyes. Each day at the orphanage, she heard the children speak with hopeful voices of their longing for this young man's return. Naturally, curiosity grew in her heart. I've heard from Mrs. Regan and the children that you solved the problem of getting these little ones to school. That's truly impressive, Miss Hill. Those incompetent officials and equally greedy staff at the school aren't easy to handle. How did you manage it all? Amasta's gaze swept across Vidya's eyes and hair as he smiled and asked. In truth, I'm not nearly as capable as you imagine, Bren. Amasta. I merely sought some assistance from my father. He's a professor at the University of London and has a few connections with certain government officials. They're minor, but fortunately the matter itself wasn't complicated. Amasta nodded subtly, not disputing her words. He averted his gaze, looking down at the street below where only a few people could still be seen. His tone, calm and undisturbed, carried a quiet expression of gratitude. Regardless, Miss Hill, I must still thank you on behalf of the children. They stood side by side at the railing, speaking in a manner that, though they had just met, conveyed an uncanny sense of familiarity. When I was here, the courtyard was far worse than it is now. In summer, the rooms were unbearably stifling. We could only lay straw mats in the yard, enduring the swarms of mosquitoes bred by the outdated drainage, while trying to sleep. In winter, due to lack of funds to repair doors and cracked walls, drafts tore through the rooms. Thin blankets were no defense against the biting cold. To avoid freezing, several of us would huddle together on one bed, trembling as we longed for dawn. Many children my age left the orphanage entirely, severing all ties. I understood them, for this place had left far too many memories that could hardly be called pleasant. Amasta's words, though abrupt in their shift to the past, did not startle Vedya. She pursed her lips and asked softly, Mrs. Regan told me that later you attended a boarding school, one registered for you before your birth by your parents, I believe. Amasta rubbed his fingers, letting a casual smile play on his lips. I spent my entire youth there. It was a very good school, the food was excellent, and we could sleep soundly. And you, Miss Hill, I imagine your upbringing must have been far more privileged than that of the children here? Vettia brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. She did not answer directly, but spoke in a clear, ethereal voice. Actually, it wasn't as ideal as you might imagine. Amasta gave a slight nod and said no more. The two of them stood together, gazing into the deepening night. Their silence carried an unspoken weight, a quiet pressure that neither broke. Not a single child came to seek them out. Even these sharp little ones had their own schemes. After tidying the messy dining hall with the staff, they returned to their rooms, hiding under blankets, giggling as they whispered about Brother Amasta and Miss Vedya up on the rooftop. One by one, the lights in the buildings along the street went out, until only the dim glow of the street lamps remained, and the world fell silent. Then Miss Vedya, as the pale moon dipped westward, Amasta turned his expressionless face toward her once more. May I ask your real name? Vedya. The elegant lady beside him smiled gently, unsurprised, lowering her eyes. Her voice carried a hint of apology as she whispered, Vedya Cleona. That is my true name, Mr. Goldsnake. Chapter 108, your objective. I've been careful, but at some point it seems everyone knew exactly who Goldsnake is. Amasta let out a self-deprecating smile. Menash, we paid a heavy price to find you. Vedya's tone carried deep remorse, as if she wished to apologize for having approached him in this manner. But Amasta gave her no chance to speak. He turned and walked steadily toward the stairs. When his figure finally disappeared, a cool, detached voice echoed from the dark entrance. "Let's move somewhere else, Miss Cleona. I don't wish to engage in conflict here, especially not with a wizard as powerful as you." The two